Thanks for joining today, everyone, for this training on effective, equitable, and person-centered housing strategies. We are excited to bring this panel to you today, and the training is hosted by the Center for Housing Solutions, so the COC lead agency, and Homebase is facilitating the session, and we're, as most of you know, a TA provider working with the COC to provide some trainings and other capacity building opportunities. So today we are, as you know, talking about housing strategies, and we wanted to do this because we know that the work that your agencies do, the work that you do, is absolutely critical to the community, and it's important not only on the individual level in terms of the impact that you have on people's lives, but also on the community level in terms of striving to ensure that Tulsa is a place where everyone can thrive. And so just as it's vital, we also know that it's hugely difficult. And the circumstances in which you operate, both the prohibitive housing market and the ever-rising demand for your services, the unforgiving landlords, all of these circumstances are extraordinarily tough, and that's without a pandemic to navigate. So your staff are working harder than ever, and they're constantly faced with countless challenges in engaging clients and working with them to overcome obstacles to regain and maintain housing stability, and at the same time trying to do this in an equitable way that overcomes unconscious biases, and all the while trying to make the most effective use of the resources that are available to you, because as things stand, many of you are running over capacity and maybe feeling the effects of compassion fatigue and burnout. So we also know that research and evidence-based practices can sometimes seem counterintuitive, and sometimes TA or guidance that's out there can be too superficial to be useful. So we've pulled together this panel with deep local and national experience and expertise to ask some of the toughest questions, some of the questions that are the most challenging that we hear from providers, and really aiming to get at the nitty-gritty of the challenges that you experience. So I'm going to now ask our panelists to introduce themselves, and I'm going to ask you to share your name, your geographic location, your agency, your role in your agency, and in alignment with our later conversation about reducing staff burnout, to also tell us about an activity that helps you relieve stress. And I'm going to ask you to tag the next panelists that you want to introduce themselves after you, so that we keep this going. I'm also going to invite all of our training participants to please share in the chat your name, agency, and an activity that helps you relieve stress as well. So I'm going to kick things off with Rex. Could you introduce yourself?
Hello, everybody. My name is Rex Bryan. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to be a part of this. I'm really excited. I'm from San Antonio, Texas. I work for SAM Ministries. We're an agency that has been providing homeless services in our area for 37 years now. There's been an evolution from emergency shelter into our existing, model that we look like. We provide rapid rehousing programs. We provide permanent supportive housing programs, transitional housing, prevention services, homeless prevention services, and then also street outreach and veteran-specific programs as well. I'm the director of the Rapid Rehousing and Prevention Programs, and so underneath that also falls our street outreach programs. So, and then as far as to help me with burnout, I like to read. I just like to take some time and sort of get away where I don't really have to think. Sometimes it's reading something as, the Sunday paper, just something where it doesn't require a lot of thought. and just sort of take me away. So that really helps me to sort of disconnect, especially after a particularly rough day. And so next I'll tag Katie.
Hey everyone, thanks Rex. I'm Katie Fanton. I'm the Director of Housing Programs for Santa Clara County in California. So with that, essentially I work for Abode Services that is a Bay Area wide organization, sorry about that. We have been in 5 or 6 Bay Area counties since 1989. The reason I say 5 or 6 is we're in the process of expanding now. We do a number of different things, including PSH, rapid rehousing. We do clinical outreach services, we do mental health support, and we also do residential services both on buildings that we are building and are, as well as other property management companies are building. We provide on-site services for permanent supportive housing folks in that as well. My job as the Director of Housing Programs in Santa Clara County, which happens to be our largest county in the Bay Area, is to oversee permanent supportive housing programs, rapid rehousing programs for any and all populations and demographic. I also currently oversee, I'm living the dream right now because I'm overseeing 4 motels for vulnerable folks with the desire for them not to get COVID, as well as 2 isolation motels for folks that are positive or waiting for test results for COVID. So that's a new acquisition for us. We're doing that a little more quickly now because of the pandemic in California and the fires is making it pretty interesting. So in terms of stress, I have a dog and he's the best. So hanging out with the dog, both walking him when I can and when it's not, smoky outside, and just having him around is a wonderful stress relief. So I am gonna tag Aram.
Hi, I wish I had a dog. I wish my landlord would let me have one. Sounds perfect. My name is Aram Housleb. I'm actually a staff attorney with Homebase. And currently, I've been there a few years. I work closely with San Francisco largely in the Department of Homelessness and Supportive Housing. So do a lot of technical assistance and strategic planning and supporting lots and lots of agencies like folks like you in terms of dealing with compliance and providing services and things like that. Before I made the leap to Homebase, I spent over a decade running programs for families in San Francisco, shelter access points, rapid rehousing programs, eviction prevention, drop-in centers, all sorts of things. So I'm hoping to be of support today. And to relieve stress, well, I have the fortune my wife is a therapist, so that helps. I can just lie on the couch. But taking drives when I can, and I have a daughter who's turning 1 on Friday. So honestly, just getting a good hug usually gets me to the next thing. So that's me, and I will pass it to Greg.
Hello, everybody. I'm Greg Shin. I'm Associate Director and Chief Housing Officer for Mental Health Association Oklahoma. I see a lot of friends on this call, so hello to all my friends. We at the Mental Health Association, we own and operate over 1,500 units of affordable and supportive housing, both in Tulsa and in Oklahoma City. We focus on permanent supportive housing, fidelity to housing first, and we operate many programs of peer-driven services, including 2 drop-in centers, peer-run drop-in centers, 1 in Tulsa, 1 in Oklahoma City. We run street outreach programs in both cities. We have many employment programs, all geared towards helping people recover from homelessness and live successfully in the community. It's an honor to be here along with these panelists from around the country. Very exciting. Thank you to Homebase for doing that. During COVID, haven't been able to go to a lot of places. So I've been enjoying the property that I have here in Claremore, Oklahoma. I have a pool and I have a deck out in the backyard. And some of you have seen my chimenea on our Zoom meetings when we're unwinding at the end of the day. So that's kind of what I've been doing to chill out and relax and keep my head together, which has been a challenge, honestly. It's been a challenge for all of us, I think. So Thank you.
All right, thank you for introducing yourselves, panelists, and to give you a sense of, just to recap a couple of things we saw in the chat, other ideas to relieve stress. We saw a lot of time with family and with fur babies and running and hiking and powerlifting, Zumba, kayaking, yoga, reading, gardening, music, video games, fishing, meditation, writing, fireworks. I'm particularly intrigued in this one. Day trips and getting outside and board games. So there's a lot of great activities to relieve stress among this group. I wanted to say, please feel free to submit your questions for the panel via the chat as they come up. So Bridget will be keeping an eye on the questions as we go along, and we've set aside time to address them. And so please keep them coming. We have a pretty packed agenda for the training. So we've got a moderated Q&A. We'll focus the first bit of that on fostering and maintaining client engagement and supporting clients in overcoming roadblocks to housing. And we've prepared some questions based on the challenges that we commonly hear, but again, we've set aside ample time for participant Q&A, so please submit your questions. And then we'll have a brief breakout session. And after that, we'll come back for more Q&A. The latter half of the training will be focused on continuing the conversation about supporting clients in overcoming roadblocks to housing. But also we'll talk about program effectiveness and equity and preventing and overcoming compassion fatigue and burnout. And we'll have another brief breakout discussion after that to finish. So without further ado, I'm going to dive into our panelist questions. And I'm going to start with a pretty broad question about maintaining client engagement. And that's what does it mean day to day for your programs to be client-centered? What does that look like?
So I'm going to start. So for us here at SAM, and especially with our building where our street outreach and our rapid rehousing programs are housed at, we're sort of right in the middle of everything. We're up the street from within a couple of blocks radius from Haven for Hope, which is a very, very large emergency shelter here in San Antonio. Also the Salvation Army, which is another fairly good sized emergency shelter here in San Antonio. And up and down the corridor here, as far as the highway system, just a lot of people here. So we see a lot of traffic coming through here. And so whether it's through our street outreach teams or like even our rapid rehousing team, really anybody through this, and this is something that I always sort of press on my staff, is there's a relationship that forms. And just like any other relationships, our personal relationships, business relationships, communication is key. You got to talk to your clients, ask them what they need, ask them what will help, what are the obstacles that they've run into the past that they want to overcome. And then when they answer those questions, you got to listen to them, listen with your ears, listen with your eyes, and really engage. You're there with that person in front of you. And so with that, I'll say, this job is very difficult because, we're working on getting insight and information from the people that we're working with and serving, trying to move them forward, when sometimes they're just not in a very good spot. So I think you have to be very intentional and very deliberate, be very aware to not allow yourself to sort of get caught into, those cookie cutter kind of scenarios or one size fits all thing. My previous experience in social services has been in child welfare. And, one of the knocks in that system is that, there's a lot of times that issues that families are looking to. I am sorry, somebody's at the front door. In those situations, sometimes, we try to do a one size fits all kind of thing, and that doesn't necessarily work, so each client is different, each situation is different. So the work that you're doing with them, the stuff that we do with them, it should look and it should be different. So, we just have to remember that they set the pace for this race that we're getting ready to run.
Thanks, Rex. I'm going to jump in on this question. I think to have client-centered programs, it really means that the programs are designed around the needs of the people that you're working with. It's not based on what your agency needs to be sustainable, or what does your program outcomes, what do they need to look like, or what do you as a case manager or a service coordinator or a property manager, what are your goals? It's not about your goals. It's about making sure that you're focused on listening and establishing a flexible plan of somebody who's trying to recover from homelessness or get back into housing, or who has a serious disability. And so how do you build your program or your individualized service plan around what your client is stating their goals are? It's not about your goals. It's about the needs and wants of the person who's trying to get into recovery. And it's easy to talk about that. It's hard to do it because we all have assumptions that we make. We all jump to conclusions about what someone wants and needs. We all have goals about what our program has to achieve. We have productivity levels that we're trying to meet. We're trying to make housing placements. We're trying to reduce chronic homelessness, so forth. So there's a lot of pressure, but none of that helps the individual that you're working with right now. So I think an empathic listening stance and working from a recovery support model of empowerment is really the way to be client-centered.
Sasha, you're muted still.
Thank you, thank you. Thanks everyone. What are the specific tools that you provide to staff or training that you provide to support this client-centered approach? How do you help your staff maintain client engagement?
I think one of the most important ones is motivational interviewing. I don't think you can ever have enough motivational interviewing training just to have that interaction with somebody and actually going through that process. You know, that's one thing that we always sort of push to our staff is to, you know, engage that. Anytime you see an opportunity for that training, you know, jump out at it and you know, and do that. Also just, you know, working on active listening. You know, one of the things here that was really a shift for us, and we saw it especially in our transitional facility, you know, just because we had those families there for a long time, is a couple of years ago when we had a new VP of programs come in, you know, just that shift to being a more trauma-informed agency. You know, there was a big shift in some things, and, you know, some simple things that we should know when we're working like this with people is you know, what was missing, I guess. And again, you know, sort of those you know, very basic things when you're working with people directly. Right now, our clinical director and one of our social workers that does outreach is sort of working on, I don't want to say creating an assessment, but, you know, really doing a thing, putting together some questions to help guide our staff, our case management staff, helping them guide or give them a guide when they're sort of navigating some of these, you know, they get into a home visit with somebody, and, you know, there's just some things that you should know about your clients so that you can really be able to work with them and help them grow. I mean, some of these relationships are long-term, and, you know, so we're really working on putting together that because sometimes, you know, staff is, you know, they've expressed concern like, oh, well, if we start asking these questions, what if I trigger something and then what do I do? Or if they make an outcry and say they want to hurt themselves and they have a plan, then, you know, so we really want to guide them or give them a tool to be able to ask those questions and then to be able to handle what comes if those answers aren't what you expect.
That's good, Rex. I think that when you talk about recovery from homelessness, people have been through a lot. As you said, they've experienced a lot of trauma, but in order to really establish someone's own identity in the community and thrive and reach their full potential, someone who's been homeless needs the same things that we all need. They need family, friends, employment opportunities, and so forth. I think we need to get away from this us and them mentality that we sometimes have. It's not intentional, it's unconscious bias at times.
Hey, Bob, did it come unwrapped? Did it come unwrapped?
Well, okay.
Gotta say something. Yeah. Can we buy?
So I was saying, I think one of the ways that we work to do that also is we implement really peer support driven programs. And as I said before, emphasis on recovery support, recreational activities. We have a program called Creating Connections in both cities that's peer-based, and it helps people get involved in the community. One thing that I've often said is that once you're back into housing and you have a safe, decent place to live, the fact that you used to be homeless should be about 5% of your identity. I'm recovering from open heart surgery and valve replacement about 5 or 6 years ago. I'm still in recovery from that, but my entire life doesn't revolve around that. And I think that sometimes providers of supportive housing and services, sometimes it's hard to work with their clients to be really integrated in the community, and that people who used to be homeless, their life still revolves around the fact that they're still trying to recover from homelessness in the community. They can't really seem to break out of that box sometimes and be deeply connected in the community in other sustainable ways. So it's a bit of a way to be very diverse in the flexible programs and opportunities that you constantly need to be able to offer to the people that you're working with.
Thank you. How do you balance client choice with managing expectations in the rental market?
This is my favorite question. So I live in the San Francisco Bay Area, which, every time I go to a conference, we do this kind of like, oh, which rents are most expensive? And almost invariably, it's the Bay Area that ends up being at the top of that list, with the exception of a few other communities around the country. It's tough because ultimately we have a shared goal, just like Greg said, that we want housing to happen for our participant and they want to be housed. Sometimes having really honest, reality-based conversations can be painful and difficult. Two of the ways that we've seen it work, one is we kind of create a grid, and I wish I had thought to share it, but really kind of putting on paper saying, okay, here are the units that are available in this community. Here are the units that are actually affordable based on the program that you're in. Here are the units that will actually accept a program. And here are the units that you want. So as you can tell, and when you do it kind of visually, there's sort of like so there's actually less of a pool than that we think there is. And I think having that conversation and being honest about available units is really important. It's hard. I've had people request living by the ocean. I've had people request a swimming pool. And we're like, yeah, cool. That would be awesome if that was affordable, if that was rent reasonable, if that was something within the subsidy that you have would be an option. We would love that for you too. I think it's important never to sort of belittle someone's desires, but to really address them head on, have really honest, reality-based conversations. And then also to say, this housing unit is not where you're going to live forever. Most of us go through different housing units, not everyone, but this is the next step in your housing journey. And being able to acknowledge that this may not be the place you love the most or the place you live in the longest, but it is the next step for you. And once you're in a stable environment, you have some opportunities to think through after a year or two, like what's next for me. So that's worked pretty well for us.
I really appreciate the practical grid idea. I think that's and I think that kind of mirrors what I wanted to add, which is being transparent, just being, I think, honest and having that reality base is the best starting place. I think you know, start with what is most important to them. I think that's a really good place. And do they have a pet? Do they need to be near transportation? Do they want to be near family? Were they participating in something they didn't want to be participating in their neighborhood, or they have had partner violence? So I think it's finding out what is most important, because even though you might think it's unreasonable for someone to want a pet or to be in a certain place, but it's really close to family, it may be the thing that actually keeps them housed, because it keeps their self-esteem and kind of they're ready to keep going because they have that thing met. But at the same time, I think we can still explain what the project's limitations are. So to Katie's point, if there's rent reasonableness, or, you know, we've tried with that landlord, they won't take us, but hey, write a letter, we could try something else. But I think it's being really transparent, and then finding out what is most important that we can get in that place. So, you know, if it was the swimming pool, or if it was allowing the pet, and that was the one thing, and we could get it, then we at least get that one thing. The other thing I think, because I'm also in the Bay Area and dealing with San Francisco, and the rents are crazy. But we've honestly just said, go out and look then. Go out and see if there's a spot that you can get, or we can help point you to the way, and see what can happen. And then I think once people get that reality check, which may just be helpful from the grid itself, and you don't even have to make them go look. But I think that once people get out there, and if they can pull something off, awesome. But if not, you can come back together and re-examine. And the last thing I wanted to add was, and Katie stole it from me too, is it's not permanent. All of us generally are trying to get to that next spot, right? You're in that little apartment, you're trying to get to the one that has, like, I have a dishwasher now for the first time in 20 years. So I'm very happy, but up until the 14 years before that, I did not in San Francisco. So it's just really, it's being able to be in that mindset that this isn't the end, and don't aspire that this is the last place you're going to be. Aspire to something bigger.
Thanks, everyone. What role do street outreach and shelter programs play in your systems of care, and why is that work important?
So in the Bay Area, outreach and shelter are the critical front door to our system. We have coordinated entry, but as you know, and especially if any of you worked in the systems, kind of pre-coordinated entry, these were kind of the main places people were coming in. So I think the biggest thing that I think where outreach and shelter play are kind of twofold. One is that they are the ones who are going to be able to potentially screen people in rather than out, are the ones that are going to be able to engage with someone in a way that makes them want to engage in services, rather than worry about potentially that they have bad credit, or they have some other kind of pockmark against them from their past. And so these are the people that can help potentially dictate the rest of someone's life, because it's the first kind of point of contact often for people, especially if your coordinated entry system is not tied to shelter, which I think often communities are facing that. And so I think that outreach is so critical in building the rapport and trust with clients, so that if you're the next program they're going to go to, you know, they're going to embrace, you know, that person's going to hopefully embrace you. The other big thing I think is these folks do, many of you, if you're working in a difficult rental market, is that you don't have housing right away. So, you know, if that's the idea, is to get everyone housed quickly, it's like you may not have that. And so I think case management at shelters can do housing focused case management, right? Maybe someone drinks or uses drugs, but they're functioning, but they really need to get an ID or they can't get housing. So you start with the ID rather than the other piece. You start knocking down those barriers to get them into housing or clear the path for them. So they play kind of the sort of paving the way, document readying role, and they also play that building rapport and trust in the system that is critical for kind of having people want to go into it rather than continue to stay out of it. Pass it to Rex.
Yeah, and just sort of like what he was saying. I mean, I think, I mean, really, you know, like you said, literally this is the front door to services, and that street outreach component, in my opinion, is so important, because that really, you know, it makes or breaks, and it sets the tone for, you know, how this individual sees our system. You know, here in San Antonio, right now, you know, we're severely understaffed as far as outreach providers go for such a large city. You know, being completely honest, I have a classroom outside my door that can seat 12 people, and we could probably fit the outreach staff for the city of San Antonio in that room. and still have room to bring in a few more people. And that's no good. You know, when the outreach providers and the shelter providers are working hand in hand, things are great. But when they're not, and I think that's what we've seen here recently over the last 2 years, there's been a big shift where, you know, one agency that was providing all of the outreach in the city, there was some funding that came down and other agencies did. And, you know, so some different philosophies came into play, different methods, different approaches, you know, and I think one of the big things is like that we're seeing here right now is, you know, with some of the shelters, you know, they get them to the shelter and that's good. You know, that's their, you know, they get them to the shelter and that's what they need to do. For us as a housing provider, we get them to the shelter and they're still homeless. And, you know, so our ultimate goal is moving them into housing. So there has been this big clash in philosophy here. And I think, you know, with that, over the last couple of months, you know, Home Base is actually in working with our community. And we just started a series of meetings today addressing some of these things to try to put together some kind of coordinated, you know, coordinated kind of response for the outreach services here in our community. And, you know, even with that, there have been some things that happened on the city level where they've had some success, you know, pretty much through a reactive response to one particular city council district. And so it was a political response to, you know, a very, very, you know, dire issue. I mean, what it's shown is that, you know, especially in COVID right now, we have a lot of people that are on the streets and, you know, more and more people are popping up in certain areas. And, you know, so they ran this pilot program that really misrepresented the process and sort of skewed data, and you know they're going to run with it, and the city council approved to replicate that times 11 in all of the council districts here in the city. And you know, once those outreach workers get boots on the ground, that process isn't going to work like that anymore. So you know, it's just very, very important that you know, those outreach teams, you know, get in there, and when that happens, then, you know, like Aaron was saying, that these folks that we come across, the outreach team is I mean, you're trying to repair relationships instead of build relationships. And, you know, we just got to think some of the folks that we work with have experienced just multiple breaches in trust over and over and over. And that makes it difficult when you come in, if there's not, you know, some kind of coordinated kind of response or efforts when you make that initial contact. So it shouldn't matter which agency it is, but, you know, the messaging that we're putting out there, the things that we're trying to do should all be the same. And sort of like you said too, you know, something as, you know, little in our eyes as obtaining an ID, that's huge. And that's a big step. And, you know, we always got to celebrate those little victories.
So for our panelists, I'm going to skip ahead a couple questions and pick up at what is the biggest challenge that you or your agencies have experienced in accepting and serving vulnerable clients, and how have you addressed it?
I'll start on this one. We were part of one of the nation's first Pay for Success programs, which essentially, it's kind of a longer explanation, but being able to provide housing support services, both pre-housing and post-housing and housing, to the highest utilizers of emergency services. So if you can imagine sort of the folks with the highest acuity who've been unsheltered for, you know, 15, 20 years. And what we've found is collaboration is the most important. So being able to have access to medical systems, behavioral health, and housing simultaneously, and being able to create a support system around folks who really, really, really are struggling. Like, for example, I got a picture the other day of an apartment that someone had taken a hammer and just decided to hammer the whole place. It was craziness. I was like, wow, that's impressive what you did there. But knowing that we have the resources to fix that unit, first and foremost, pretty helpful. So being able to have those funds, and also knowing that this person is on a journey towards housing stability. This apartment will not be their last apartment, and may not be their apartment for much longer, but continuing to have connection to that client and really being able to support that client with resources from all of the available kind of support systems within the county, and having the ability to move them, assuming that they can and want to be moved. So I think for us, we've seen lots of complicated client behavior, but acknowledging that we need the resources to best serve when someone is in that situation, instead of not providing enough resources, if that makes sense. So essentially, if we know that they're going to be pretty difficult and the situation's going to be pretty difficult, instead of, we need to provide the maximum amount of support with the maximum amount of collaboration for that to work. So that's one experience.
That's good. I really do appreciate that answer, Katie. And I think along those lines, we really emphasize the separation between housing and services. The case manager relationship is different than the property manager relationship, but both of those relationships can be supportive of the client. Sometimes there's tenant education in the case of a resident who does extreme property damage, which I can say at the Mental Health Association, we have seen that many, many, many times. And sometimes the case manager can be working on activities of daily living or ways to help people and support their medication management, or other kinds of activities that pull them away from being in the apartment all day long. None of those are on the property management side. All of those are empowering clients towards working on a recovery plan, whatever it is that they need, versus tenant education, which could be something that the property manager is doing. And that could be very different, going over again what it is that they agreed to when they signed the lease. Here's what the lease said. This is exactly what the lease says. Don't assume that somebody knows exactly what the lease says, even if they signed it already. So a lot of tenant education can go a long way towards that. And then one other response that I had to that was that your housing placement and the plan needs to be very individualized. And sometimes a way that we've been able to achieve success is be ready to relocate people. If it's not working out in one location, talk to them. Maybe you can try a different apartment complex, maybe a different part of town. We've moved people 3 or 4 times, sometimes, until they actually get in the location that helps them thrive the best, or where they feel the most at home, or they feel like they're in the community and connected. It doesn't always work out the first time. So I think just by default, that is something that you can do to implement eviction prevention.
Thank you. It looks like we have a related question to follow up on what you're highlighting. Michelle Pearson asks, are you paying for the repairs through your grant or private funds?
Yeah, I would say for us, it's in this particular situation, it's through the grant. We've also seen it through the private funding. I think either way, if you can get it in your grant proposal, awesome. If it needs to be private funds, awesome. Just get it somehow, some way.
And I see we have another question in the chat from Renee. How do you ensure that you're serving equitably based on disparities found in your system?
If you're speaking to demographic inequities, I think that that's a challenge that all homeless systems have, but I think that you actually need to self-monitor, and we actually have started a tracking the demographics across our housing portfolio of who's getting housing placements over time, to make sure that we're not, we don't have some type of unconscious bias that could be driving our housing placements. And that we take a look at, and we look at the point in time counts, we take a look at the by name lists, and we take a look at the equity in who is achieving housing in both cities. And I would like to say right now, I feel like we're pretty on target, but I think that if you're not self-monitoring, it is kind of easy to drift on that. And it would not be intentional, but And sometimes this goes back to a term that I've heard. Sometimes you can do what's called cream skimming. You gravitate towards the easiest to serve people, the ones that are working with you the best, the most successfully, the ones that are most agreeable, and so forth. And that can kind of steer you off track over time. And if you're not willing to tackle and do the hard work to take on the most difficult cases.
Greg, we have another question from Michelle. How do you get a client out of the lease early without paying penalties? Do you pay the penalties, and with what funding source? I'm guessing Katie might have some insight on that also.
Sure, go ahead, Kate.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've done a couple different things depending on the program. When we certainly will pay penalties when we can. The biggest thing we do that we like is something called you guys probably know this, but a mutual notice to vacate, which essentially says to a landlord and a tenant, hey, it's pretty clear this isn't working out. Sorry about that. But let's end this before it gets ugly. Let's end this to make a good situation for everyone. And so the landlord and the tenant mutually sign documentation that says, I'm voluntarily leaving this unit and I'm voluntarily releasing you from your lease. In that scenario, then the security deposit gets handled like appropriately within the law. And essentially it really creates a good connection for the landlord and the tenant and helps everybody move out as quickly as possible.
Yes, and under the COC rules, you cannot charge clients for repairs like that. It's not an allowable expense to charge the tenant themselves. Michelle Batchelor operates the HUD BASH program, so that's not COC funded. But sometimes, in many cases, we just have to write off those losses, and then we have capital replacement reserves that we have set aside, and we have to go ahead and do the repairs and bring in the next veteran in that case. But hard to capitalize those funding streams, but it's almost a necessary requirement to be in operation.
I want to go back to the equity piece of things and ask y'all what, while serving clients with diverse backgrounds, experiences, and needs, what do equitable systems and services look like? Aaron, Greg?
Yeah, happy to jump in. I think when we're looking at equity, we're kind of addressing it in a couple ways. And one is through whatever requirements or barriers that are set up, and then through however we're assessing folks. And I see that those are kind of two of the biggest places where you may be able to ensure equity. So one, ideally, we'd all have enough resources to house everyone. And I think ultimately that's what we need to be striving for, because we shouldn't have to create assessment tools and we shouldn't have to create prioritization tools. But off of the soapbox, if you are going to use an assessment tool, and because you likely have to, because you have to make some decisions, you have to be vetting it to see what's happening. Are people representative from the general population in your homeless system? In San Francisco, there's about 6 to 7% Black or African American folks. They represent 37% of the homeless system. So once they get in the homeless system, they're actually served, from what we're seeing, at a pretty equivalent rate to their population within the homeless system. But this tells me something is happening upstream. And that's where I think like the barriers that we have for folks getting in, maybe they became criminal justice involved, maybe they ended up on the street and have now a drug or alcohol addiction. It's now we have to figure out how to screen people in. Any rule you have ultimately is screening out. It may be necessary, but you really need to reflect on any rule you have, whether that is a funder induced rule or that is something that you all have created. So if you have curfews, it may not let people work at night. There may be certain people that best have jobs at night or at awkward hours. If you have meals at a certain time, you may be crushing someone's opportunity to eat and get to their job. You know, some of these, it's like, how do you run a program? I need staff there to run showers. Sure, but it's reflect on those things. Don't deny people just for bad credit, criminal history, DV history, or you're just going to fall into doing something that is likely not going to be equitable. Your rules generally should be based on behavior, right? Not on people's past history, or even if they, you know, don't pass a drug test. If they're maintaining themselves, I come back to help them get that ID, help them get that housing, then they can get the services. And so I think it's really looking at your assessment tools if you don't have enough resources, and then really opening up the front door so that people are coming in. Otherwise, think about who makes your assessment tool, who makes the decision of whether someone get housed. Do you look like all your clients? Are you from where they're all from? My guess is not, but maybe. But if you're not, then there's just built-in spots. We've heard about kind of implicit bias and those kinds of things. Well, that's how it all gets built in. So I think it's about keeping barriers low and examining our tools.
That's really good, Aram. I have to say that I think you have to embrace diversity. You have to intentionally embrace it in an all-encompassing way at the organizational level. And that starts from the top down. It starts with board development of your nonprofit organization. What does diversity and inclusion look like in your recruitment strategies for who's on your board of directors? That will help trickle down across the entire organizational, the way the organization, the way that it functions, how it lives and breathes, who's inclusive. That will trickle down to your entire workforce and how your workforce serves your clients. So I really think that it starts from the top down. Having said that, I do like that you pointed out those systems issues, because we generally see that people of color are overrepresented in homeless populations. But beyond that, we see overrepresentation in rates of incarceration. That's very, very true in Oklahoma. So criminal justice reform was passed in the state of Oklahoma. Overwhelmingly, about 60% of the public voted for it. But it's one thing to vote for it, it's another thing to implement it. So I think that those inequities at a systems level are things that we can all work at as advocates. But those are not largely under your control at the systems level. I mean, at the organization level. So at your agency, there are things that you can do. And one of the things that we do is we send out an annual staff survey every single year. And the staff survey is anonymous. We have almost 200 employees, and it helps answer questions about the background of everybody. We get rates of mental illness in our workforce, previous experience of being homeless, comorbidity, substance abuse history, felony history, and so forth. And I can say on an annual basis, anywhere from about 25 to 40% of our workforce has a history of homelessness. We have about 35% of people have a felony history. So I think that the way that your agency operates and who you hire, and like you said, reflecting the people that you serve, that voice of lived experience makes a big difference in the culture of your organization, and it helps eliminate chances of implicit bias.
Thank you both. And I think you both touched on working with clients to overcome poor credit and rental history, and also to accept folks who have low or no income, or to have criminal background experiences with the criminal justice system. So wondering what are some ways that you work with clients to overcome these barriers, both in terms of engaging landlords and then supporting clients and increasing in overcoming the barriers. So I think Rex and Katie.
Go for it, Rex.
Yeah, really just, again, those relationships with the landlords. I think for us at SAM Ministries, we're fortunate to have so many programs, and then just that homeless prevention program allows us to have a lot of contact with a lot of landlords and property managers. And you know, what's a better way to strike up a conversation about, hey, how can we work with, you know, different things? What are you willing to accept when you're bringing them a check for, you know, a couple of $1,000s? We also have a housing specialist. One of his main duties is going out there and doing landlord engagement. You know, it may not be much, it's a really small budget, but you know, he shows up at a property manager's office and you know, takes some donuts and you know, lets them know this is what we do. We have this program. We have this program. You know, if you have people that need rental assistance, you know, this is the process to refer them. And then we turn around and start talking to them about the rapid rehousing programs and the barriers that the clients that we serve, you know, have sometimes. We also have a fairly large PSH portfolio. So again, that allows us to have this constant contact with landlords and property managers to build those relationships. And that relationship is key. You know, sort of like how Katie was talking about that mutual notice to vacate. You know, when you have these situations and maybe harder to house clients or clients that have significant barriers, you know, being in front of things, you know, being very transparent, you know, talking with that landlord, you know, and always, you know, just, you know, reinforcing that, hey, you know, first, you know, we do want them to treat our clients like they would every other tenant, but for them to know that we are here for support if needed. And then when they call on you, be immediate, you know, be very responsive to their needs when they call on you. We found that that's helped. You know, we do have some private dollars to pay for some of those damages that have happened, and, you know, similar to what they've shared. I mean, we've had those same situations happen, and you know, we've had to come out of pocket, but, you know, we don't give up on our client. We move them somewhere else and we start over again. You know, and for the client in those situations, you know, they've been kicked down on a lot of things, and, you know, maybe some of them they're testing boundaries and seeing what's going to happen, if you're going to give up or walk away, whatever. But I mean, I think the one thing in those scenarios is to always frame the situation around their tenancy. You know, always do that. So.
Awesome. Rex, that's almost everything I would have said. The only probably thing I can think of is reiterating the need for transparency and partnership, and just saying, hey, look, we understand that the landlord-tenant relationship is a really important one. It's a really complex one. We expect our tenants to be tenants, and we expect our landlords to be landlords. And sometimes when we're in the mix, they forget that they have a responsibility as landlords, and it's really important to hold them to good account for their responsibilities, which is like making sure the place is habitable, making sure that the things that a tenant needs are in place, issues that we can't mitigate, taking responsibility for, we hate to have these violations served, but that's not our responsibility. It's the responsibility of an owner. And I find even when things are really hard, I think many owners just want to know that they're not alone, because they acknowledge that being a landlord's tough, regardless of who your tenant is. I've seen tenants who have the means to be wonderful tenants financially and are just terrible tenants. And I've seen tenants who don't have the means to pay for their own unit and be awesome tenants, right? It's a pretty equal thing in one sense. So being able to say to a landlord, hey, we're in partnership with you. We understand the situation. We're being honest with you. There are limits to what we can do, but we can always be honest.
Thank you both. Wanted to ask, in homeless systems of cares, as we've talked about at length, I think demand for services, shelter, housing, all of the services that your agencies provide, it's almost, if not universally, exceeds supply. So, and we see that increases in demand outpace increases in the capacity of systems and programs to meet the needs of the population. So this begs a twofold question. What can be done on the system level, and what can be done on the agency level to deepen the impact of our collective work? Toss it to Rex.
Sorry, I got lost there. I guess for us, it's more of or what I can talk about more is on an agency level. We're working on some stuff at a system level, and I really credit our COC for really sort of morphing into what I envision a COC to be. But that's a work in progress for us as a community. You know, it's just tough because, you know, our housing market here is probably a lot different, or I don't know, maybe in Oklahoma, but, you know, when I've talked to the folks in California, you know, our housing market's a little bit different as far as rent affordability. and being able to get people in. But what I think my experience that we've run into is, that bias against individuals who are exiting homelessness and coming to work with programs, whether it be through a rapid rehousing project or a PSH project. And, so again, while we do have those great relationships with landlords and property managers, it's a battle that we fight every day with our clients and for our clients. And so, while there isn't really, I guess, the housing inventory, I mean, yeah, it's an issue, but I mean, also it's more of just that bias against, people who are exiting homelessness. And so that's sort of one of the things that we just continue to fight, especially having a street outreach program that we have some flexible funding where we can house people directly out of the streets without having to put them in the coordinated entry system. So these are dollars that if somebody, may not need some long-term assistance, we can do that. And even with that, we're presenting to a property or to a landlord, somebody who has, the ability to pay, we're willing to help them get in. And then still, none of that seems to matter. It's the fact that they're tied to an agency that helps people who are homeless, and sort of, I don't know if it was Greg or Aaron that was saying that earlier, it's like they're defined by their homelessness. And so I don't know. It's one of those things, all we can do is continue to advocate and speak up for our clients and continue to fight that. So.
Yeah, the thing I can think about from a system level is being willing to participate in system level conversations. I think if you all are anything like me, it's hard enough to do my actual job and my staff's actual job. And when I get asked to do things like talk about system issues or give my feedback on a homelessness plan or, whatever the county is working on, it can be tempting to kind of just be like, I just can't. But I think we are the people that should be giving feedback, and we should keep saying the same thing, and even if it means saying it over and over again, to the people who can affect change. I think lived experience in the work is really critical to those who are making those decisions, and sometimes people in a sort of county or system level do have that experience, and sometimes they don't. So being willing to use your voice for good is really critical, I think, in that way.
I know we're getting close to time, but I wanted to add in a few things. One, and people are already getting it to in the chat, which I appreciate, about moving on strategies and flexible subsidy pools. But thinking about it as your front door, as if you're using coordinated entry as your front door and looking at what that's offering, right? So you're likely going to be serving the most vulnerable, highest users first, right? Because those are the people accessing things the most and is generally the priority, which means that you're going to be left with not having enough housing potentially for other folks. So it's like, what in San Francisco, we have something we call problem solving. I'm sure everybody else has their own version of diversion, prevention, rapid housing, those types of things. So having literally, if someone calls and says, oh, I could stay with my aunts if I could pay for groceries for the month. Oh, thinking more flexibly about using people's family, because it's often the last place that one of the biggest indicators of people being homeless is that they're staying with their family because they've lost other things. And so if you can kind of support that relationship staying in place. The other thing is, once they get into shelter, I think a lot of times we're just trying to keep a roof overhead and keep people fed. But if you're waiting on housing, you need to be doing the work in shelter that's going to get people ready. So document readiness, taking care of criminal history so that when they do get that opportunity, they're in a better place and they can write that letter to say, these are all the things that I've done. The other piece is, don't let people stay in permanent supportive housing if you can. Some people may need to be there for a long time, and it's in the name permanent, but it's also in the name supportive. And so just because folks are on SSI, I've had clients who are on SSI since they were 4. So they just assume that they were always disabled because they had something going on early in life. So they've never tried to get a job because they were disabled. So make people think that they can do more. And a lot of times you can actually make money and still get disability money. So the other piece is, someone said the moving on program. It's critical. If you don't have a way for people to leave your system and go to like Section 8 housing or more affordable housing, your system won't move. So the greater the flexibility, those moving on things that people were sharing is huge. The last thing I want to say is, and I've talked about the low barrier piece, but I want to speak to how that actually works. So in San Francisco, the Charles Schwab Foundation gave 9 agencies $75,000 a piece for over 2 years, not a lot of money, over a couple of years to use principles that were low barrier and let folks in and not kick people out for kind of lower level offenses. And they saw a 25% decrease in the time people spent in shelter across those 9 agencies, and a 31% decrease in the number of people they could serve. So using low barriers actually got people in, got them housed faster, and then moved people along so that more people could actually be served. And I know some people have asked questions, well, what am I do if my agency doesn't do this? Or what am I do if my community doesn't do this? But this was basically a group of agencies that kind of bonded together to do something differently than what was being done. And then they saw these outcomes. And so now it proves basically that they should continue to do these things as it creates that space in the system. So.
Yeah, and I actually want to flag that question and maybe talk about it a little bit more. I saw Nancy is asking, what can I do if I'm a case manager? And some of the barriers I face are because of rules at my agency, and it's not in my power. I can't dictate the rules or the hours or et cetera. So what if the barriers are coming from the agency and you're a case manager?
That's a good one. I can jump in quick. I think you do what's in your power, right? I think with most of these things, and I think, I think Greg was, sorry, someone was bringing up motivational, Rex was bringing up motivational interviewing, using strengths-based things. You can do those things that are in your control. You can come at people being culturally competent, not putting their barriers in front of them, and thinking about housing first. Okay, I know my boss wants me to work on the drugs and the other things. Well, pick which thing is most impacting their housing, and then start with that piece of the puzzle. I think that's one piece. And then if you can show you're having any success even in your little world that you're kind of creating, then potentially with a lot of things, and I think this is even to funders, if you try new things or pilot new things even as one person and prove the results, it's proof of concept, right? You've shown that actually this thing is doing a better job at serving our mission. And then ideally, if there's times at staff meetings or other things that there's space to talk about doing things differently, then maybe it's at least finding out why the reason is you're doing something. So at least being told my funder says we have to do this. And maybe there's no way around it, or maybe there's a way to advocate to your funder, but it's at least finding out and helping the organization reflect on why the rules are in place, so you can just do your own investigating and do your own kind of research and kind of generating the conversation. And certainly easier said than done, but you have your kind of bubble and the folks that you encounter.
Yeah, just quick to tail end onto that. Like you were saying, I think one of the things, especially working in this, you always have to know whether it's working with a client or in this scenario, you have this pot that you have control over and this pot that you don't have any control over. But definitely taking those things and I think sharing them, sort of what he's saying, sharing them up and down your chain. One of the things that happened with us here recently, we get a fairly sizable rapid rehousing grant from the city of San Antonio. And in the past, we had 2 case managers and we had to serve almost 70 households. And that didn't work out very well. And it's not going to work out very well. And as we renewed these grants and we had failure, I mean, they kept giving us money. They kept funding that project, but people were falling back into homelessness. And so where that project 3 years ago was 2 case managers, 68 households that we had to serve. This year, it's 4 case managers, 47 households that we had to serve. We backed it up with evidence. We backed it up with data. We backed it up with this. Hey, the coordinated entry system is giving us clients that have high needs, and there's no way that we can serve these folks with high needs with 2 case managers and 35 caseload of 35 each. There's no way. It's going to fail every single time. And then what have we really done? It's a waste of your money. And so through this, we are housing folks in this program that, by this assessment and everything, they rate permanent supportive housing. We're housing them in a rapid rehousing project. We're giving them the support that they need for permanent supportive housing in a shorter term kind of intervention. And it's working. Does it work out for everybody? Absolutely not. But we got to be okay with that and then try to adjust when it doesn't work with that person and sort of see what happened there. But it's working for other people. But, if we didn't ask, then we'd still be sitting here with the same amount of money, 2 case managers and 68 households. But I mean, to have a rapid rehousing caseload less than 15, I'll take that every day. And the expectation of our staff is absolutely to be in the home working closely with these folks as they dictate, you know, the services that they need and that they want.